Your inner critic is energy, and you can give that energy to your character or the scene. What? Right? I know. But that's a thing that I find is one of the most effective tools I have for dealing with performance anxiety and your inner critic. Instead of trying to suppress that feeling of fear, you can actually hand it to the character that you're playing, or you can hand it to the scene or to the room. In this episode, we are exploring self-criticism and building a whole system around it. We're looking at why that fear exists in the first place, so the science of it. And I have a 3-step process for managing your inner critic so you can actively use that energy to make your improv even better. I also have a PDF that you can use to help manage that reflection process after a show or a class to help with this. You'll learn how to turn that inner voice from a source of stress to a source of creativity and really authentic, good performance. Hi, I'm Jen DeHaan, and this is Your Improv Brain. I am a performer and an improviser with my production studio called Stereo Forest, and I've taught and coached improv with several different theaters. This show helps give you practical tools to help with your characters and your acting. So you want to also stick around to the end of this episode because I will share a specific improv exercise that helps practice channeling all of this analytical, critical energy into becoming a radically supportive scene partner. So I have an intense inner critic for as long as I can remember. That voice is like all or nothing, and it loves to make catastrophes. It can keep me up at night going in circles about how I can improve this or that in this situation. And while some of this thinking actually can be pretty logical and henceforth useful, a lot of it is just like irrational noise I can do without. For a long time, I thought this voice, this critique, was some problem with my brain wiring and something to be avoided entirely. But I eventually started wondering, can I take some of this critical energy that's so pervasive in my life and make it useful, like in improv? So first, that mindset of fear and perfectionism in improv is really common. A lot of us have it, like the fear of having an audience out there or messing up a scene or a YouTube video or a podcast, not understanding what's going on in the scene, for example. And a lot of this fear comes from a feeling of being judged, both by others and by ourselves. This is driven by what science calls a maladaptive form of perfectionism. So now, perfectionism, it's mostly thought of as a problem or a defect in our heads or something, but it can also be a good thing. So striving for excellence, doing really well, that's a useful thing for motivating us perhaps, or challenging us, which we might like. But the unhealthy form of perfectionism is defined, like by science, by a deep fear of being evaluated negatively. So that's where we get stressed. That's the voice of our inner critic. So I'll throw in some resources in the show notes or the show description about this difference, the good and the bad. So where does this critical voice come from then? So science feels like it could be your brain trying to protect you. So our brains are wired to keep us safe from danger. And a lot of those perceived dangers are social ones, not physical ones. So that's why you might feel this adrenaline rush just from standing in front of other people, or like hitting publish on a YouTube video, I guess. Your brain is flagging a potential social threat. If you face social threats when you're young, like bullying, this response might even be more pronounced for you because your brain knows it's really a thing. So the self-critic is actually trying to help in all of this. It wants you to be prepared. It wants you to be safe. It wants you to be good enough in the eyes of others so you don't get rejected socially by the community around you. That's a safety thing. So the improv that we're doing, it kind of turns all of this social stuff on its head, right? Improv asks us, the performers, to be unprepared. There's no script. It tells us to be vulnerable and human. We want to be relatable and have, a sense of self in these scenes. It wants us to fail on purpose too, in front of an audience. Yeah, there's rules and we have structure in form, but we still don't know by design how the show will go down. And that's why our self-critics get so loud during improv. They can be so controlling, right? They're screaming at us. They're trying to protect us from this thing that kind of looks to that ancient brain wiring that it is socially like a very dangerous situation. And then if you throw any neurodivergence into the mix, maybe this gets even more dangerous. Those flares are going up for us who are. So once we understand this, that the critic is trying to help, even if it's making things harder, then we can start to work with that voice in our heads. And really the first step is just acknowledging it. You can also prepare for the failing. That's another way. So the inner critic is really worried about us failing. We can prep for that. So I talked a lot about this in a previous episode about failure. I have a couple of them about failure. I have one of those episodes on my website. It has 7 hacks in it for what you can do in those moments. So preparing for failure, though, it takes away a lot of that power. And you can also remember that these perceived failures that we have are an important part of the learning process. So I covered this point as well in another episode previously. And I also have a PDF with exercises that you can do to practice these challenging moments and scenes and get reps in. So I will have a link to all of those resources in the show notes and the description. Okay, so there's also that energy that we get from this inner critic. And you can actively use that anxious energy, that feeling in your gut, that adrenaline. It's how you can really feel in the moment. So you can give that energy to your character. You can let your character be the one who is anxious or scared or worried. And that will translate as authentic because it is. Also, you are very invested because you care so much. And all of these things together are very useful for you as a performer. You can take all of that, all the anxiety, and put it in a box and make it part of your character. It's part of their problem, not yours. And I've found this to be really useful as a tool. It pulls away from my brain, it hands it to my character, and then I don't feel as anxious. So this energy, it's useful for self-analyzing your performance, as long as you're careful about this part. So I'm talking about reflecting after a show for positive gains, not beating yourself up. So self-noting, it can be helpful when it's done effectively and carefully. And there are many ways to approach this, but I've created a free downloadable guide with a simple framework for self-reflection after a show. And that document contains questions to guide you towards these insights on your work while avoiding that really negative self-talk. So you can grab that document by subscribing to either of my newsletters at improvupdate.com/newsletter. It will be linked in the footer of that newsletter if you're already signed up, the next one you get, or it will be sent to you if you're a new subscriber. So when you learn to self-reflect this way, it helps you adjust that negative perfectionism into the positive type of perfectionism. So you're moving away from worrying about being judged by others to focusing on competing with yourself, with your internal growth and skill acquisition at the core of it, making it a positive thing. You're working on whatever your personal goal is in your performance. So how do we put all of this stuff into practice holistically? So here are 3 ways that you can approach your next class or rehearsal or show. So 1, set a specific learning goal. So before you start, decide on one small thing that you want to focus on. So today I want to focus on the cadence of my voice, or focus on making stronger physical choices, or sustaining a strong character choice throughout this very long monoscene. This could be something that only you know, or you might share it with a trusted coach. And this gives you, your critical brain part of you, a productive job to do. It can track your progress on that one thing instead of just yelling at you about everything that happens during that practice. So 2, notice your critical thoughts. So just practice observing them. Don't fight them. Don't judge them. And you don't even need to track what it's saying. You just want to let go of that information. What you're noticing, what you're focusing on is when they happen. Is it during a certain type of scene, or in a certain location that I practice in, or within a certain team environment? Do you have specific recurring thoughts, or is it more of like a physical feeling that you have? Sometimes just choosing to notice that these things exist is the first step towards dealing with fear and anxiety, because you might learn some information about why this is happening, and that could provide some amount of information for making future adjustments. And 3, push your focus outwards. If you find yourself critiquing your own thoughts, or even your scene partner perhaps, or your team even, maybe in the form of excuses about what they're doing to your performance before you circle back to your own critique, all of that, whatever it's like, that's your critic at work. So how do you fight that? Well, you can do that by being relentlessly curious about your partner. Focus outward in the scene. What is your scene partner saying? Listen more intently. What is your scene partner doing? Be curious about that. How can you support those things fully and completely as your character? And then that critical, analytical energy, it goes outward. And this is a really useful, positive thing, using it to listen and support your scene partner's choices and build the performance together instead of just focusing on yourself, which is what's happening if you're listening to that inner critic. So that brings us to the exercise that you can use to train this exact skill. So this exercise is a variation of the very common radical yes and exercises. They go by many different names. So this version is one that I'm calling Accept This Story, You, although I've done this exact variation several times under several different names by different coaches, and I can't remember what they are. So I'm calling it Accept the Story, You. So there are many approaches to this idea of like super accepting what your scene partner offers, but this one is designed to help you notice the little ways that you might be missing, little opportunities to support your scene partner. Maybe you find you're even blocking them a little without realizing it previously. Or maybe you take over the narrative of the scene or an entire set maybe. That blocking, which it is, could be your inner critic protecting you from your scene partner's bad idea. Your inner critic saying it's a bad idea and you're protecting the scene from that. Maybe it's the reverse. Maybe you're blocking your own ideas internally before they come out into the scene. But this exercise can help you identify these tendencies, whatever they are. And that identification leads to growth in your practice. So in this exercise, you are going to accept everything your partner says with vigor and rigor. So you have 2 players up. They're going to tell a story together. You can do it one sentence at a time, or if you're a little bit more experienced, you might want to do one collected idea at a time. So that might be a few sentences. The key is you have to thoroughly and absolutely agree with everything that your partner adds, and then add to and gradually heighten it in an interesting way. So this story, it can have peaks, it can have valleys, it can have tangents if you want, but you cannot block anything. You have to connect the ideas and make it all make sense. The whole story has to work, has to be cohesive. The goal is to be so curious, so interested, and so in agreement with your scene partner that you make them look great. And you're doing that for each other. And remember, every improviser, or at least most of them, have felt or currently do feel this way. Their inner critic is on their shoulder. So many of our brains are like the comments section or like reviews on the internet. People are way more likely to go out of their way to leave a negative review than a positive one. They've found that out or something. I don't know. Or maybe I'm wrong. Comment if I am. Anyways, it sure feels like our brain are those negative reviewers, So you are not alone in this, is what I'm trying to say. I'm very much with you, and many other improvisers are too. So let's take all of those inner critics and put them to work now for us in a good way. Understand where it comes from, and then give it a productive job to do. Channel that energy outward into your character's brain, or by being really curious in your scene partner. You acknowledge that inner critic. You set it specific goals for it to track, and you use that energy to fuel your characters and train yourself to focus that analytical power on supporting your scene partner instead of critiquing yourself. So I'll be discussing how all of this stuff specifically applies to neurodivergent performer brains in my Improv Update newsletter, which again, you can sign up for on my website, improvupdate.com. Select the option for this one. Select it for performing and your brain. That's where the neurodivergent stuff goes. So if you sign up for both of the newsletter versions, you'll get newsletters with improv resources every single week. So thanks for tuning in. I'll be back next Monday for the next episode. Bye for now. You have been listening to Your Improv Brain, a Stereoforest production. This show is created and is written, edited, and produced by Jen Hahn of Stereoforest.com. You can find show information, show notes, transcripts, and contact information at the show's page at Stereoforest.com/improvbrain. Thanks for listening.